What if I told you that some places are better left undisturbed? That there's a cemetery so cursed, so haunted, it has been forgotten by time until now. As the storm rages on and the wind howls through the trees, something ancient stirs beneath the earth, waiting for the right moment to rise. In this chilling tale, the veil between the living and the dead grows thin, and I'll take you into the heart of the darkness where no one dares to tread. Don't forget to subscribe to Disturbing Stories. Hit the like button and share this video with those brave enough to listen. What you're about to hear may just haunt you forever. Story 1. The Vanishing Trail. I was never the kind of person who believed in legends or spooky tales. I always thought that mysteries were just stories made up to scare those who dared to listen. But that night, that night changed everything. We were a group of 5, young people eager to challenge ourselves and explore what was left of the old forest trails, the ones few dared to tread, especially after nightfall. The rain began to fall lightly, like a veil of mist, but it was nothing that would stop us. The tall, dark trees above our heads formed a narrow corridor, filtering the moonlight in soft beams that barely touched the ground, which was covered in dry leaves and mud. Autumn had already taken over the place, and the cold winds whispered stories that had never been told aloud. With every step, the feeling that something was watching us only grew stronger. The trail seemed familiar at first, but soon I realized something was wrong. With each turn we took, the path seemed to change. Not that the trees were moving, but it was as if the terrain was somehow reshaping itself. I looked at my friends, trying to see if they were feeling what I was. But they were all laughing, challenging the fear with jokes and playful remarks. "Are you guys noticing this?" I asked, trying to hide the growing knot in my throat. "This trail, it's not the same. It's just your imagination, man." "Chill," replied one of my friends, Daniel, laughing as usual. But I knew it wasn't my imagination. Something was wrong. A strange smell of wet earth and decay began to invade my nostrils. A sense of discomfort took over me completely. Something was watching us, and it wasn't nature. We continued. Even though the sky was darkening faster than it should, the trees, once so imposing and firm, now seemed to lean over us, as if they were closing in. Every step I took felt heavier, the air thicker. Daniel was up front, laughing again, while the sound of our footsteps in the mud filled the eerie silence. Then we found the cabin. The first impression I had was that it wasn't there before. It was an old wooden structure, completely covered in moss, with a broken roof. But something didn't make sense. I looked at the trail behind me. There was no path anymore. We were trapped. "Should we go in?" Daniel asked, with a curious expression that couldn't hide his nervousness. No one responded, but the silence lingered until one of us, I don't know who, pushed the door open, which creaked like it had been there for centuries. The sound echoed through the forest, mixing with the distant rain. Inside, everything was silent, a dense silence. No shelves, no furniture, just the smell of dampness and something else, something old. Inside the cabin, the darkness seemed deeper. While my friends explored the corners, what I found on the wall made me swallow hard. Words, scratched into the wood, as if someone had desperately tried to write something with their own nails. The message read, "Leave now, before it's too late." There was no doubt that someone or something had been here, and not in a friendly way. The rain was now coming down in a frenzied rhythm, pounding against the cabin's broken windows. I looked at the door, still open, and then I heard it. It wasn't the sound of the rain or the wind. It was the sound of footsteps, very close. They hadn't been there before, but now, someone or something was there. The wet leaves moved quickly, as if something was approaching the entrance. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked, already feeling my heart race. But no one answered. Daniel, once again was laughing. "It's just a storm, man. Chill." But it wasn't a storm. The sound was getting louder. And then a figure appeared in the doorway, standing in the rain, motionless. Its eyes glowed in the darkness. I couldn't see much more, but something inside me froze, as if the very air had grown denser. Before anyone could scream or react, the figure vanished. I looked at my friends, and only then did I realize we were lost. There was no trail anymore. There was nothing, just the sound of the rain and a deep emptiness around us. "We need to leave now," I said, my voice hoarse. But before we could take a step, the cabin door slammed shut with a bang, and the air grew heavy. We were trapped. I didn't know what was real anymore. The trail had disappeared. The cabin seemed to belong to a reality we couldn't understand, and we didn't know how to escape. From that moment on, the shadows of the forest became our only companions, and the sound of our own footsteps was the last thing we heard before silence took over everything. When we finally managed to leave the cabin, the forest was empty. There was no trail, no trees we recognized. We were completely lost, directionless, as if the very place had vanished. I never went back to that forest. I never found the vanishing trail again, and whenever it rains on a cold autumn night, I find myself staring at the forest, wondering if perhaps it will swallow me again, like it did with those who dared to walk there before us. Story 2. The Strange Visitor. I had just arrived home, drenched to the bone from the storm that seemed to never end. The rain hammered against the windows with an absurd intensity, and the wind hissed as if it wanted to invade the house and tear everything apart. I hated those days. The constant sound of rain, the restless wind. It gave me the feeling that something was about to happen. But at that moment, I just wanted to dry off and forget the night I had spent lost in the forest. I closed the door behind me and threw myself onto the couch. The warmth of the house embraced me, but there was something about the quietness of the place that didn't feel right. It wasn't like I was being watched, but there was something, a presence in the air, that I couldn't shake off. The room seemed darker than usual, as if the shadows had stretched along the walls. I looked around, hoping to see something, anything, that could explain what I was feeling. That's when I heard the knock on the door. I glanced at the clock. It was late, very late. No one should have been there. I looked out the window. There were no cars parked, no movement on the street. No one. Still, the knock persisted. Once, twice, 3 times. Each thud seemed louder than the last. Something in my spine froze, but I walked toward the door as if it were inevitable. When I opened it, what I saw made me doubt my sanity. A man was standing at the entrance, wearing a long, dark coat. He didn't have eyebrows, or perhaps they were just hard to see under the raincoat. But what unsettled me most was his gaze. It was deep, dark as the night, but with something else, something disturbing. His eyes seemed to scan every part of me, as if they knew something I didn't. "May I come in?" His voice was low, as if it had come from a distant place, as if the wind itself was the messenger of his words. I hesitated. The fear I felt was instant. There was no logical reason for him to be there, and the sense of danger was palpable. But for some reason, my body gave in and I let him in. He didn't say a word as he walked into the living room, as if he already knew the way. I followed, not knowing what to do or say. When he sat on the couch, the temperature of the room seemed to drop a few degrees. The atmosphere grew even denser, more tense, as if something were stirring in the shadows. The man didn't seem bothered by the cold. His eyes were still fixed on me. "Do you know the price of curiosity?" he asked, his words echoing in my mind. I tried to respond, but my throat was tight. "What do you want?" My mind screamed, but my mouth couldn't produce a sound. He seemed amused by my silence. "Ah, But you already know. You saw what you shouldn't have seen, didn't you? He wasn't asking, he was stating. His eyes gleamed with an almost supernatural intensity, and I felt a growing pressure in my chest. My breath became difficult. My body started to shake. I pulled away, trying to maintain some distance between us. His presence was suffocating, as if he were draining all the energy from the room. With each step I took, I felt the shadows around me closing in, as if the space around me were getting smaller. The walls of the house seemed to be curving in on me. "You were in the forest, weren't you?" he said with a slow smile, as if it were the world's last secret. My body shuddered. He knew where I had been. How? It was impossible. There was no way he could know. I tried to open my mouth, but my words got lost in the air. I wanted to scream, run away from him, but something stopped me. An invisible force, a strange magnetism, kept me there, rooted to the spot. The man stood up slowly, his steps both soft and heavy at the same time, as if the house were his, as if he were part of it. I didn't know what to do, so I just stayed where I was, trying to gather the courage to ask what he wanted from me. "I saw you. I saw what happened in the forest," he said, stepping closer, and the cold emanating from him seemed to penetrate my skin, touching my bones. "Don't forget, curiosity has its price, and what you saw that night can't be undone. What's lost out there is now lost inside you." His words were like poison, infiltrating my mind, making everything cloudy, blurred. I wanted to scream, run, but my legs wouldn't obey. All I could do was stand still, watching as he came closer. Time seemed to slow down, and the fear, that primal fear, overtook me. "You can leave me now, can't you?" I finally asked, my voice cracking. He smiled. "I am the visitor, but what are you searching for? I am not the one who leaves." Suddenly, he was at the door, as if he had materialized there. I looked at him, confused, trying to understand, but before I could ask more, he disappeared into the darkness of the night, like a shadow carried by the wind. I ran to the door, but there was no sign of him. The street was empty, the silence filling the space. He had vanished as if he had never been there. But as the night went on, a strange feeling haunted me. The unease he had left me with, the words he said. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew this wasn't over. The strange visitor had left me with something more, and I had the feeling he would return, or that something was still to come. I didn't know if I was ready for it, but in that moment, I knew that whatever it was, it would not let me be at peace. And on every rainy night since then, I wonder if that man, that figure, was just an omen, or if he was part of something much bigger, something that had already begun to consume me, even before I realized. Story 3. The Cemetery of Black Hill. I never believed in ghost stories, nor in local legends. I believe people create these things to justify the unexplainable, to make sense of fear. But what I experienced that night, it was not explainable. It wasn't just fear. It was something bigger, something that haunted me far longer than I could have imagined. Black Hill had always had a strange fascination for me. It was an isolated area, far from the city center, with a dense forest surrounding an old cemetery. It wasn't the kind of place someone with common sense would walk through at night. But on that night, something pulled me there. Maybe it was the heavy atmosphere of the storm, or the fact that I couldn't shake the feeling that something was calling me. I knew there was something in that cemetery, something still waiting. I decided to go. I didn't care about the stories of shadows lurking around the hill, or how the wind seemed to whisper warnings. Whatever it was, I had to see it with my own eyes. I grabbed my coat, put on my boots, and without hesitation, I stepped out into the darkness. The path to Black Hill wasn't easy. The trail was covered by dense vegetation, and the torrential rain had turned the ground into a treacherous swamp. Each step seemed to sink me deeper into the night. I was alone, but I felt as if I was being watched. Something wasn't right, but I kept going. The cemetery was now in sight, a cluster of stone gravestones rising against the cloudy sky, like a grim warning. When I entered the cemetery, the wind seemed to carry a different vibration. Something there was in constant motion, something I couldn't see, but felt in every fiber of my body. The gravestones were ancient, some broken, others with inscriptions nearly illegible. I approached one of them, whose words had faded with time. The stone was cold to the touch, but the wind around me was chilling in a way that didn't seem natural. That's when I realized there was something among the gravestones, something moving slowly. It wasn't a person nor an animal. It was a shadow, sliding over the ground with indistinct outlines, like a thick fog taking on a human shape. I stopped, the blood freezing in my veins, but I couldn't move. Something kept me there, an invisible force, something that wasn't just fear. The shadow approached, slower and heavier than I could imagine. Its shape became clearer, more defined, until it took the form of a man. He was hooded, his face hidden in the shadows, but his eyes glowed with such intensity that they blinded me for a moment. When I regained my sight, the figure was right in front of me. "You shouldn't be here," his voice echoed in my mind more than in my ears. It wasn't a human voice. It was something else, deep, distant, as if it came from another world. I wanted to run, but the words he spoke kept me in place. He knew I was there for something more, that it wasn't just curiosity. He knew I had seen something before, something I shouldn't have seen, something that shouldn't have been in my mind. "What do you want from me?" My voice trembled, but my mind was clear. I needed to understand. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he raised his hand and pointed to the hill, toward a grave in the distance. I followed his gesture, even though I knew I shouldn't. When I looked at the spot, the earth seemed to move on its own. It was as if something was being released, something buried long ago, something that should have stayed there. Then, the truth hit me like a knife. The grave was empty, and there, in the place of the tomb, what remained was a presence, something dark, something ancient, something waiting to be freed. I was paralyzed, unsure of what to do. The man, or whatever he was walking away. His steps made no sound, but he was heading towards something else, something that was calling me. And then, without thinking, I followed him. As we moved away from the gravestones, the shadow in front of us seemed to grow stronger. The wind was stronger now, as if reacting to the presence of that thing, to the presence of the hooded man. He turned to me, and for a moment, I saw what was hidden under the hood. His face was disfigured, with black, deep eyes, no pupils. His mouth was sewn shut, but that didn't stop him from smiling. The smile was grotesque, horrible, an expression of pure malice. "The cemetery is just the beginning, boy." His voice sounded like a distant echo, cutting through the storm. "What you've awakened won't leave you in peace. You've joined us now, and here you will stay. There is no escape." When he turned his back and walked away, the shadow followed his steps, disappearing into the trees in the distance. I was paralyzed, feeling his presence like it was part of me, like it was inside of me, moving through my body, through my soul. I knew that what I had seen wasn't just a nightmare. It was real. And the scariest part was that when I tried to leave, the path back was gone. The forest seemed to have closed behind me, and I was lost, completely lost, trapped in a web of darkness that wouldn't let me escape. The wind began to howl, like a hungry creature that knew what had just happened. I looked at the trees, at the shadows, and somehow, I knew the worst was yet to come. The cemetery of Black Hill was not just an abandoned place, but a portal, and I had opened something that should never have been touched. Something that would now hunt me, and I would have no escape. What if I told you that some places are better left undisturbed? that there's a cemetery so cursed, so haunted, it has been forgotten by time until now. As the storm rages on and the wind howls through the trees, something ancient stirs beneath the earth, waiting for the right moment to rise. In this chilling tale, the veil between the living and the dead grows thin, and I'll take you into the heart of the darkness where no one dares to tread. Don't forget to subscribe to Disturbing Stories. Share this video with those brave enough to listen. Hit the like button and activate the notification bell so you never miss the next terrifying tale that awaits you.